Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our community conversation, implicit bias, how it affects us and how we push through it. And today we have three wonderful thought leaders that are going to share from their perspectives about implicit bias. And when we talk about implicit bias, we also want to make sure we touch on some of the actionable part too. Most of us have heard of it. Many of us have been impacted by it or know someone who's been impacted by it. So today we want to talk about it. We also want to talk about some things we can do to address implicit bias, of course. Our three thought leaders, Debbie, Mayra, and Leigh, they're going to share their perspectives as we go through the implicit biases. Beth, are you guys showing the presentation?
Water, some tea, some something.
Oh, just some water.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, and as I mentioned, our three thought leaders, Debbie, Mayra, and Leigh, will share their perspectives from their own personal thought processes and experiences. We're also going to have a TED Talk from Melanie today. I think you're going to find very interesting as she shares her personal view on implicit biases. Thanks to our promotional partners, we could not do this without the folks on your screen, the folks here to support us for this. And then, of course, we could not do this without all of you joining in to share your thoughts or perspectives also. Couple ground rules, we've talked about this before, but just as a reminder, we're going to share some opinions today. We're going to share some thoughts, some concerns. It gets kind of touchy sometimes, or some things may impact others more than others. We ask that we all be kind to each other and we share with each other in positive ways. We want to learn from these experiences and build from there. We're going to show a TED Talk also. Typically, the TED Talk shows better if we turn off our video during the TED Talk. Before then, that's fine. We want to see your faces. We want to hear your comments. Share comments in the chat if you would, please. But when we do the TED Talk video, we ask that you would mute your video or turn off your video. So typically, the signal works a bit better than that. So without any further ado, we're going to go to our first speakers. We'll start with Debbie.
Thank you so much, Timmy. Thank you and welcome to each and every one of you. Thank you for taking time out to join us today for this very uncomfortable but important topic. So I'm going to share on implicit bias. I'm not going to read through everything, but just what's bolded, the attitudes or stereotypes that affects our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. And this means that we are not even aware that they are occurring. And I just wanted to share two personal experiences with this. I was at an event recently. As many of you know, I'm an elected official. Thank you for your votes, by the way. And I was at an event, and I'm a huge promoter of bringing in the younger millennials and Gen Zers into any environment that I'm in, because they are our future leaders. And I went to the event and many people knew who I was. And I was there with two Hispanic staff members of mine. One was from Mexico and one is from Dominican Republic. And after greeting me, without looking at them or speaking to them, a gentleman said, "Oh, are they with the kitchen staff?" And I looked at him and it kind of gave me a little, huh? And I said, "No, they're my staff members." And they were just so hurt that that was the first thing that they thought about them. Another example was when I first ran in 2019, I was at an event with one of our now Court of Common Pleas judges. And same thing, without even looking at me, they just assumed that I was with the judge's campaign team. And I said, "No, I'm a candidate." And it was like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." Those are just examples of it, and it just came out so smoothly, like second nature. And that happens every day in some shape or form in my life personally. And it is frustrating, but as I do more research into implicit bias, I learned that it's a teaching moment. And I'm able to turn that, instead of being hurt, turn it into a teaching moment. And I'm going to turn it over to Mayra to speak about the different terms and biases.
Thank you, Debbie. I always forget that we're on Zoom and I have to unmute myself still. Thanks again, everybody, for being here. Thanks for participating and for your willingness to continue to learn. Again, I also know that this could be a difficult conversation to have, but it's one that it's very important to me to share and to have as well. So the next, I guess, examples that I could have for you as well. In group thinking, if you look at the description and mimicking and holding back, whenever I think of this, I think of how we Hispanics, when we come in order to feel like we fit in, we want to fit in, of course. We don't want to be outcasters. We want to learn English, and kids are smarter. So kids will pick up English a lot easier. But in doing that, sometimes teachers will forget that they do have a uniqueness in their language and their culture, that they have so much more than just the learning English part and the assimilation part, that they come with background knowledge, and that speaking another language means that they have that background knowledge, and that they shouldn't be forgetting who they are in order to just fit in. So for those of you who may be educators, always think of that. There was a time when it was said that we couldn't learn a second language because it would mess up, you know, we had to adjust and we had to learn English and English only, because if we spoke Spanish, then we wouldn't learn English fast enough. And that's not the case. I speak both languages, English and Spanish, and I also speak other languages that I've picked up along the way from living in different countries. And I always think that speaking a different language gives you a different perspective than if you only know one or two languages. So that group thinking and that holding back in order to fit in, to me, when thinking of our Hispanic community, especially as new migrants are coming in, with the migrant education program, we encourage them to learn English, yes, but we also encourage them to continue to learn their original languages, their native languages, because we know that that will give them a different perspective, and they're going to be doubly smart because they can think in another language and they can communicate with people from another language. So that would be one of my biases that I have, that I want people to continue to learn their original languages in a way that we continue to assimilate. If we could go to the next slide, please. When we talk about giving people equal opportunities, again, for me being Hispanic, this is something that comes to my heart. And having worked in higher education for over 20 years and continuing to work in education, I didn't always know it, and I didn't learn it until later on in life when I started working in higher education and working specifically in the diversity, inclusivity realm. I attended another session similar to this, and there was a TED Talk that discussed how in education specifically, educators still think, and this is an old way of thinking, it's not new, it's been there for a long time. When you see young men, young brown men or young Black men, you don't see the potential. You know, sometimes it's easier to label based on what we think, what we know, instead of seeing our young Black men or young Black or brown men as smart, as students with potential. They're seen as thugs or they're seen as cholos based on how they dress. And that to me really meant a lot, because I'm a mother of 2 brown boys, and I would hate for my boys to be labeled despite how they may dress. Because my 14-year-old does dress to me, and I call him, you look like a cholo, because he wears the pants, you know, halfway down. And I tell him all the time, you don't want to do that to yourself, because when you get to school, people will begin to judge you based on how you dress. And that's not how I want people to think of you. You are very smart, you are very bright, and I want you to have the same opportunities that everybody else has, despite how you dress. And I know that that's not always the case. I know based on data that whites have the highest rates of education, then Asians, then Hispanics, then Blacks. And that's based on those opportunities that they are either given or not given from the time that they enter school. And there's also the same for Black young girls. Sometimes when they're seen in school, they're seen as troublemakers instead of all of the potential that they have because they are smart. Now, some of you may have heard affirmative action in higher education was taken away this year. And that to me was a blow in my stomach because I know I benefited from affirmative action. I know it. I know that I went into school because I was smart. I knew that. I knew when I went into college, I was accepted because I was smart, because I spoke 3 languages, because I lived in Mexico, lived in the US, and had also lived in Brazil. Therefore, I spoke 3 languages, actually 4, because I also learned French when I was in high school. But I knew that affirmative action helped me to get a leg into the college because I was a minority. And that to me didn't matter. I knew that I had every right to be in that college space, but I also had it thrown in my face my very first year in college by a white student that I was there because of affirmative action and that I was probably taking somebody else's space. When I didn't even know affirmative action was, but now I know. And I know that it did benefit me, but we needed those tools in order to give us a leg that we didn't have. If it hadn't been for a lot of mentors, I probably wouldn't have made it either, but I knew that affirmative action was something that really did help, and that when it was taken away, to me, it was taking away years of hard work to give our younger generations an opportunity in life that if they didn't have it already, it was taken away and taken back even furthermore. So when you put together equal opportunities, regardless of gender or race, sexuality, sexual orientation, ability or disability, and when you add also affirmative action, it's the hard work that others have put ahead so that we can get to a little bit of equity, but we're still far away from it. You would like to go to the next slide? And I'm going to let Leigh speak a little bit about some of these statistics.
Yes, thank you for this. And thank you for this conversation. This is a conversation that I hope we have again and again and again, because it is definitely a conversation with many, many layers to it. But before I address these statistics, I do want to say just a couple of things. I want to say that that those of us who have experienced implicit bias are also capable of perpetrating it. And I think that it's important to remember that that we all need to be aware and thinking about how we view everybody. I work. So my title is the Director of Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Accessibility. And one of the things that I do and love to do is I work with a variety of communities of people with disabilities. And I have to say that in terms of the experiences that they tell me about also, there's just a lot of implicit bias. There's a lot of bias that involves the assumption that somebody with a manifestly physical disability may be less intelligent or less capable than they actually are. And I think there's a lot of patronizing that goes on that goes on in dealing with people with disability. I also want to say I also have 2 sons, and the experiences that they have had, depending on how they are dressed, are shocking. And also, not actually, they are not shocking, but they also began at a very, very young age. I also want to talk about, we talk about affirmative action in terms of supporting and uplifting people who have been marginalized. But I also think it's time that we acknowledge the privilege, which is in some ways a form of it's an unacknowledged form of advantage, and that I think has to be acknowledged. But there, I went to a college where there were a wonderful college where people did not see the legacy students as having a particular as being helped, and the legacy students absolutely had a similar path that they were traveling to get to college, and I think that is something that people have to kind of acknowledge as well. So in terms of the statistics, I will just read these out aloud to you. 60% of employed Americans have experienced or witnessed discrimination on the grounds of age, race, gender, or LGBT identity. So I would ask you to think about where you have seen, experienced, or witnessed discrimination. And I would ask you to think about what you have done or not done about it, when you might have stepped forward on behalf of someone, or when you might have stepped forward to correct someone. And I would also ask you the harder question, which is how to do that, because I do think that there are circumstances that require different techniques. 42% of Americans have been a victim or a witness of racism at work. Again, ask the questions. When have you seen this, or when have you experienced this, and how have you addressed it? 66% of African Americans believe that they work for a company where racism prevails. I think that says a lot. And I think what that says, it speaks to is the structural racism. It may not necessarily have to do with individuals, although often it does, but I think that there are some embedded there's embedded racism in a lot of organizations. Look around and ask yourself, who is leading the organization? Who is in the C-suites? Who is on the board? Who are the department heads? And why is that? Who has had the opportunities to learn how to be a leader? Who has been forgiven mistakes or errors in judgment, and who has not been? I think these are important questions to ask. And where are there opportunities to develop new young leaders? Can we go to the next slide, please? So here we're going to talk about code switching. And I think many of us who are BIPOC, and also people who are, many people do a form of code switching. So I know I certainly do that with my friends versus my professional environment. People who are neurodivergent talk about masking. Everybody does it so that they can fit in. And I guess the question is at what cost is that? At what cost is that to you as an individual? And at what cost is that to the idea of normalizing and embracing diversity? When do you code switch, and why? When do you not code switch, and why? I think these are important questions. And I'm going to be very explicit and say, for those of you who do not code switch, do you notice when others do it? And And maybe you could ask yourself why, because I think a lot of people do code switch in order to fit in, and may code switch in order to feel more comfortable in the surroundings. And if you notice that a colleague is doing this, you might ask yourself, I would never, ever, ever call someone out on code switching, but I would, but I might ask myself, what is the environment that is what is it that is making them feel the need to code switch? Okay. Mayra,
I'm
you
gonna
could
take
pick
on, Leigh, I'm gonna interrupt because I was late,
Yeah.
so yell at me. You just brought up some really good points.
Mhm.
Would y'all talk about it as a group for a couple minutes at least before we dive into the next point? Because code
Yeah.
switching is huge, and you just brought up some great points that I would love to
Yeah.
have some discussion on.
Mhm.
Yeah. For me, it's interesting to say that when you feel like you fit into a place, you don't have that need to code switch. When
Mhm.
you don't feel like you fit in, you go into this constant wanting to fit in. And so you constantly code switch in order to fit in, even if it costs you because you're stressed constantly, because you're thinking about it constantly. I talked about language, for example. It's interesting to me that over especially the last few years now that I've found my voice and me speaking and being more open to speaking. But I wasn't always like this because I didn't always think that I was strong enough to hold my own opinion, which I probably wasn't. But I also noticed that people listen to me because I don't have an accent. So it's easier to understand me than those that do have an accent. And having worked for a number of years, I know like there was a one point when I was working at a college when one of the secretaries would come to me and she would say, can you talk to this person because they have an accent and I don't know what they're saying. And it was that they wouldn't even try to understand. They wouldn't take the time to ask questions. It was just, it was easier to pass that person on to me, even if they didn't speak Spanish. They may have spoken a different language that I also didn't understand. It could have been an Asian person, it could have been an African person, and I didn't speak their language either. But it was that they didn't want to even handle the accent because they couldn't understand them. So I've learned to accept that and to take that to an advantage, that people will listen to me because I don't have an accent, because people still question people who have an accent, regardless of the fact that that person took a long time to feel comfortable in speaking the language, and maybe that person just can never get rid of that accent. If you think of Sofia Vergara, for example, there are people in Colombia who have such a thick accent in their own countries that it's almost impossible to get rid of that accent when they speak English. And some people just can't get rid of that accent, but people will question you and how smart you may be based on having an accent or not having an accent.
And why do you want to get rid of part of yourself?
You
Code
wouldn't.
switching? You
You
don't.
wouldn't, but in order to feel like you want to fit in, you try hard and hard and hard and hard. And I sometimes do say you work twice as much in order to have the same thing that some other people have, because you will continue to practice your English day and night to try to get rid of that accent, that inevitably you can't. And you have to give up at some point, and you just have to accept the fact that people may or may not believe you based on having that accent. And you just say what you need to say. And what you have to say is important, even if you do have an accent. It's the other person that has to deal with that, not you.
So I wanted to add something to that. I would ask everybody what voice you use for your GPS system, because
Good one.
you think about the choices that you've got. This is a thing that I complain about all the time. Think about the choices that you have. Who is allowed to be the voice of authority? Who is allowed to be the voice of direction for you? And think about that. Think about who your choices are, because I think that this speaks exactly to what you're saying, Mayra. You know, what accents we think are acceptable and normative, and what accents we think are not. And what does that imply?
And the other thing that I wanted to add too, and if you notice, some of you may have noticed, when Timmy introduced me, he introduced me as Mayra instead of Mayra. And again, recently in the last few years, I've realized that, and I've always known this, that I became a different person when I came into this country and I was given a new name. And I say I was given a new name because when I got on my school bus at the age of 12 and the bus driver asked me what my name was, and I said it, I said, Mayra. She said, I don't understand. Can you write it down? So I wrote Mayra. And she said, oh, your name is Mayra. I guess that's my name. So from then on in school, I was Mayra. In workplaces, I'm Mayra. And with my family and friends, I'm Mayra. And it does bring a different personality into the equation. Again, it's like Leigh says, how do you behave with your friends versus how do you behave at school or at work? And so when we change our names from Juan to John, or from Maria to Mary, or whatever the name may be, so that your name now sounds different, you really do become that other person. And it happens a lot with our school age kids when they are going into school and their teachers are pronouncing their names in an American way. Now this kid has two names, the name that they have at school and the name that they have at home. And they really do start to have two personalities, the personality and how they have to behave at school, and the personality and how they may behave at home with their Spanish speaking or other language speaking friends and family members. And you really do begin to lose yourself in that battle. And I've seen it with my nieces and nephews, how they do become a different personality when they're speaking in English to when they're speaking in Spanish. And it's so interesting that code switching, like literally I can see it in the same environment when they're talking to their brothers and sisters in English than when they're talking to their parents or grandparents in Spanish. That is also code switching. It's becoming that different person based on your name. And something else that, you know, I'll add, again, having worked in this environment for a long time, people talk about their natural hair. You know, I don't care now that my white hair is showing. And to me, it's a sense of pride. It says, I am Native American. I know I am. I know my native background is part Purepecha. It's part Native. And I acknowledge that. But not everybody does. People will dye their hair. People will blonde their hair in order to fit in. And it's the same for African Americans. It's what hair do you bring to work to fit in?
Well, and I think that's such an interesting point, Mayra, because I think you know, recently there's been persecution of young Black men with textured hairstyles, and I forget what the name of the school district is in Texas, but it's but this is why we have the Crown Act, and you know, I guess the question really is it enforced? I also wanted to just add something about names, because I think it's not just the accent that implies, but also who you are and what your background is. And I think that there's a lot of judgment about that. And I always tell people, you know, do not judge this name. The Puritans had the wildest names, you know, there's Cotton Mather and Increase Mather and things like that. And you know, we have just normalized certain names and just refused and have othered other names. So I think that is part of the code switching as well. Let's see.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's Debbie now. Is that right?
Yes. So we're about to watch a TED Talk on implicit bias, how it affects us and how we push through it. This is a really, really good TED Talk, and I'm hoping that after we view this, you'll be able to have some questions for us or comments on it.
I would like to begin my talk with an important message. You know, like the ones for the pharmaceutical companies when they see people walking lazily along the beach or running in slow motion through fields of flowers while they tell you the side effects of their product? Nausea, vomiting, heart arrhythmia, constipation, impotence, erections lasting more than 4 hours. But seriously, I'm going to say some things during my talk that may make you uncomfortable, and they should. But what I ask of you in this time is to stay present with me through this and ask yourself some critical questions, to really listen closer and ask and really question your own thoughts and behaviors and be open to a new view of yourself. You may ask as I start to present this, you may say, oh, Melanie, I got that. I know this. I read the book. This doesn't apply to me. I would like to challenge that belief. And you may say, what is this concept that is so controversial that she feels she needs a preface statement? The concept is implicit bias. Let me tell you a story. A young couple, college sweethearts. They graduate school, begin their careers, get married, and start a family. As they start to approach their 30s, they begin to say that they're closing in on the American dream. They purchase their first home. 3 weeks after they close on this home, the husband becomes violently ill. So this family, husband, wife, 3 children, ages 5, 3, and 1, and a baby on the way, goes searching for the diagnosis that has stricken this otherwise healthy and vital 32-year-old man. Turn to your neighbor and say, 4 weeks later. As this man lays critically ill and dying in a hospital, doctors are circling around a cluster of diseases that they know must be the thing that is killing this man, despite the fact that all the tests for these diseases have come back negative. They begin to harass the husband and ask him to tell the truth and to really open up and let them know about his IV drug use and his secret unprotected sex with men. You see, they were trying to make the case to continue looking for HIV despite multiple negative tests. Finally, the wife comes and says, what are you looking for? To which the doctors reply, we're looking for HIV and sarcoidosis. So the wife, kind of perplexed because they thought they'd already ruled those things out, says, well, why are you looking at only those diseases? To which the doctors say, well, as a young African-American male, she becomes irate and says, stop right there. I want you to check my husband for things that white people get. And magically, within days, they have a diagnosis. Stage 4B, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and a prognosis, 2 weeks to live. The implicit bias that existed within these doctors resulted in a behavior that showed what diseases they chose to and not to look for. The implicit bias of these doctors said how much value they placed or did not place upon the information that they received from the patient and his wife. You may say, Melanie, how does this happen? How do we, as good activists and hardworking, progressive, open-minded American citizens, how do we continue to fall into the story of these stereotypes? Implicit bias, those unconscious things that have been flowing through us since childhood. You may say to me, well, what is implicit bias? Well, I'm going to give you an academic definition. Implicit bias, otherwise known as implicit social cognition, are those attitudes and stereotypes that affect our behaviors, our decisions, and our attitudes unconsciously. I relate it to like the Matrix. Anyone here seen the Matrix? When you're in the Matrix, you don't know you're in there. You're just happily walking along, thinking everything is okay. Well, I'm here today to yank out the plug and disconnect you from the mainframe. Let me share with you another story. Picture it. I feel like Sophia Petrillo. Picture it. 4th grade math class. A teacher asked for volunteers to go up to the board to work on long division. One young girl and two of her friends go up and they start working on the board. The little girl is the first one done. Since she's the first one done, she starts checking her answer and looking over it, and now that she's very convinced that she's gotten the right answer, she waves to the teacher to check her work. That she hears a sound from the back of the room. The answer is wrong. Check it again. The girl, quite perplexed, because she checked it twice and she knew it was right, she goes back to the board and she checks her computations again, getting the same answer. So she goes back to the teacher and says, Teacher, I know it's right. I checked it 3 times. Now at this point, the teacher, being very stern, sharply says, I said it's wrong. Check it again. Now the girl is thoroughly perplexed. It's math. It's either it's right or it's wrong. So she goes to her desk where she has a calculator. So she starts working on her computation, and it's the same one as is on the board. So now she's thoroughly convinced. She said the teacher cannot say anything. So she holds up her calculator and says, Teacher, look, I got it right. All the way to the 1000th place. Now this teacher, thoroughly upset that this student continuing to challenge her, says, I said the answer is wrong. You niggers can't do anything right. The student is struck dumb by the words that just hit her like a cannon. She didn't understand. Why is the teacher saying this to her? I don't understand. Why is this happening? Her father was a mathematician with a PhD from a prestigious university. She had learned long division in 1st grade and a different method for doing it. She didn't understand why was her teacher saying this to her. This little girl learned the first of many valuable lessons that day. First, she learned that her teacher did not see her as a gifted student. 2, her teacher didn't see her as the child of educated parents. The teacher did not even see a correct math problem on the board. Some people may say this one was a raging racist and only saw this child as an uppity nigger who could not conform and do right. But what I'd like to offer to you today is another frame. Could it be that this teacher, her implicit bias had so ingrained to her that blacks were so intellectually inferior and unintelligent that it was impossible for a child in an urban school to not only get the problem correct, but do it in a different method? So then when faced with something that all her life that her biases had told her was impossible, that could not possibly be, reacted from such a primal place to protect that worldview that she had held sacred up until that time. There's another quote. Some people are just not ready to be unplugged. They are so inured, so dependent on the system as it stands that they will fight to protect it. Again, the Matrix, that's Morpheus. Implicit biases are pervasive. We all have them. Even people with avowed commitments to impartiality, like let's say judges. Now you may say to me, Melanie, these are wild stories. These are extreme examples. We're good people. Good people don't do these things. That can't be real. Let me tell you today, this is very real. I'm going to share a piece of information with you about these stories that's going to tell you how real they are. These are both stories out of my life. In the first story, I was the wife who, big and pregnant, as my mother said, big with child, had to fight to get people to check my husband for things that white people got. And the implicit bias is those doctors could have left a woman without a husband, children without a father, and a mother without a son. I was the gifted 4th grade student in the second story. In that story, in the end, it led to my first act of nonviolent social protest. I staged a sit-in for 100 days in my living room. Now, I'm going to share one more story with you just so you can understand that this, you may say, well, Melanie, you're kind of old. And, you know, these things may have happened long ago in the land far, far away, like Tatooine, you know. But I just want to let you know that this happens right here in River City. So this September, a beautiful, gifted African-American 9th grade girl enters school. Because she'd been in a region, in an honors program, she entered 9th grade with enough credits to technically be a 10th grader. Now, this young lady has a goal. Her goal is to go to Cornell and study neuroscience. She has had this goal for many years, and all the people in her circles, you know, nurture her in this goal and make opportunities for her to start to build the building blocks to make her goal a reality. So as she enters 9th grade, she goes to meet the guidance counselor, as 9th graders do. And as guidance counselors do, she sits down with the student and says, well, what is your goal? And this young lady, she's very confident in her goal, as 14-year-old girls can be. You know how that is. You know, she goes and says, I want to go to Cornell and be a neuroscientist. To which her guidance counselor reacts, well, that's a big dream, but let's look at something more realistic, like MCC. In that moment, the student stood stunned as she watched her goal crumble. And people may say, well, Melanie, he's just one person, but he's so much more than that. He was the guidance counselor. In the schools, just so you know, the guidance counselor is the person who is charged with setting the academic plan to help students get from point A to point B to get to their goals. So if he didn't believe in her, how was he going to help her? And if he didn't help her, how was she going to attain her goal? This was the match that ignited a forest fire of self-doubt, negative self-talk that resulted in depression that manifested itself in school avoidance, a decrease in grades, and the eventual lack of ability to engage in the everyday life for this child. You know what the ironic thing is about this story? This is my daughter's story. 40 years later, the words may have changed, but the bias, the power, and the potential impact remain the same. But you know what's even worse about that? Is that my daughter's story is not unique. This story repeats itself hundreds of times every year in the Rochester City School District. For hundreds of students going in with dreams and goals. And the thing is, the counselor did not look at my child and did not look at her academic record, did not look at, but just because of what he saw when she walked in, crushed her dream. But I don't want to leave you on a downer, and I'm going to tell you there is hope. Because what has been done can be undone. Our brains are malleable. They're these incredible, even though my brain is farting right now, they are incredible. There are these incredible capacity for growth and change. And so you may say to me, Melanie, how do I do this? First, what I want you to do is to call yourself on your own stuff. When you're walking down the street and you see that person coming and you cross over to the other side of the street, call yourself on it. Ask yourself, why did I do that? What did that person do to facilitate that response from me? And then once you've done that, you start looking at yourself. I don't want you to think I don't understand it. This takes you being extremely self-aware. But once you do that, you start having these conversations with your family and friends. It's very easy to have these conversations in the nice, warm, fuzzy places of a TED Talk, but it's much more and it's much different to have it at your Sunday dinner with your mother-in-law. Okay? What we're looking for, we say we want to be better. But in order for us to have this better world we're talking about, we must be better ourselves and be better to each other. We have to move into what I call transformational activism. In order to create a world with equity, we must do some things. First, do your own personal work. 2, make some connections with people that don't look like you. 3, when you have privilege, use your privilege to create equity. And guess what? Many of you in this room have it. Use it. And 4, intentionally and deliberately engage in non-biasing activities. That means get out of homogeneous groups, get into some heterogeneous groups where not everybody's the same, and start learning some stuff. Take that stuff and share it with others. I want to leave you with some new language. Ubuntu. It's a Nigeri Bantu word that translates into the idea of I am who I am because of who we all are. And we are who we are because of who I am. It talks about the interconnectedness of us all. It is one step beyond I am my brother or sister's keeper. It is I am my brother and sister and they are me. I see you, I see myself. When you look at yourself next time, see me.
How about that for a video? Tell you, the folks that, if you don't mind, let's have some conversation, let's have some dialogue. Those who don't mind, just put your videos up so we can see each other, let's talk to each other. And let's have a conversation. We got 3 wonderful thought leaders that have shared their own personal experiences. Let's do what Melanie talked about a little bit and talk about some transformational activism. So think about it for a second, and I'll start with me personally. Yes, I have had the occasion to judge a person based on how they look before I got to know that person. And it may be different from what some other folks have done. But I can think of my time coming through corporate America, seeing some people and judging them based upon the way they look. And yeah, I was wrong sometimes. And I can admit that, I was wrong. So I guess the question we ask ourselves, as we go forward, for this to be an actionable event for us to walk away and say, I learned something about myself from here. I'm going to do something different. Melanie gave us a laundry list of great things we can do. She talked about doing your own personal work. I'm doing my personal work right now. Yeah, I've learned some things when I watched this video. I learned some things about myself. You know, make some connections, she talked about. She talked about when you have privilege, use it. You know, she talked about the intentional and deliberate engagement and non-biasing interactions. There's some questions that came also that when people signed up, some folks submitted questions. And those questions are along the same line of things we have just talked about. So let's hear from those who signed in. What are your thoughts? What's in your headspace right now regarding implicit bias? Donna.
It took me back, I don't be here. It took me back when I was living in Poughkeepsie, New York, and I got a job with IBM. And I had never been out of, around other people, just my own. And so I was thrust into a corporate world and I felt so out of place. And I remember we had to go on a golfing trip. Yeah. I was like, I don't want to go. And my mother said, you go, she said. I'll never forget. And she said, Donna, you have to be a chameleon. And I was, I think I sometimes still use that technique. I'm always be a Black woman, but then learning to adapt in other areas as well. So that's what I just, it took me back to there working in that corporate office. And I think it was only 2, whites. It was only 2 Blacks in the whole office.
Excellent point, Donna. Thank you for sharing that. Can we identify with that? We've been thrust in situations, employment-wise, whatever-wise, that we just had to adapt.
Yes, I like Donna. I have had that privilege to, well, I don't know if it's a privilege, Donna, but I have had that situation when I came to the US. I'm from Jamaica. I came to the US and my issues were a whole lot where, as Mayra said, the language, the accent was a problem. So many people had a problem trying to get you to lose their accent. And that was one of the things I was not willing to do code switching for anyone. That was one of the things my mom taught us. You're going to be you wherever you go. Do what you've got to do and do it well as a person you are. And I keep remembering that every time someone tried to get me to be someone else, I keep hearing my mom's voice in my head, because my mom was a community engagement person. She did a lot of outreach. So that was her job. And she taught all of us to be community engaged and community outreach. So we learned that every day with my mom. So my mom said, you're going to be who you are wherever you go. So when I came here, I had problems where people wanted you to be someone different. I lost a lot of myself when I came here anyway, even though I tried not to. At Johnson & Johnson, I had bosses who were, I'm going to be honest with you, they were racial. And there are days when I'd come in and make a suggestion as to do an experiment, how to do an experiment. And my boss would say, no, I don't think that's going to work. It's not going to work. And a week later, I'll see one of my white counterpart doing that same experiment that I explained to my boss and gave him the entire process of how to get it done. I see one of my white counterpart doing it. And I'll ask, so how did you come with that? And say, oh, well, my boss, whatever his name is, told me to do this. And he gave me this outline to work at it. And I'm like, oh, really? You know, I've had that so many times happening to me in that company with that boss, that there were days when I'd go to work and I'd sit in the car with my husband and I'd cry for 10 minutes before walking into that building. My husband will sit with me, I cry, and he'll pray with me and say, okay, babe, let's go in now. And I'll walk in and I'll do my experiment. And so I know where you're coming from. And I've had enough of that. And even outside of my company, my job, I have experienced that where people have an issue with my accent, have a problem with me doing certain things because I have an accent. And they feel like, oh, other people will not understand, or I may not be able to do a good job, you know? And they look at me like, you have, you know, my degree is not as important or as good as somebody else's. So I've been there and I've faced it several times. Still face it, but you know what? I've got a God who I serve, and he's going to take me through it regardless of who and what is happening. So.
Janet, thank you so much. You know what? That has to spark some thoughts. Come on. You know, listen to what Janet just shared, implicit bias has impacted her emotionally. You know, what do you think about that? You know, Mayra talked about, her having to mask accents and to have to code switch, if you would, Janet just talked about it personally, how she did it also. How do we fix this kind of stuff? What do we do?
Jimmy, you have Giselle and Sylvia and Mayra with hands up.
I didn't so much have a solution. I just wanted to share something.
Can you talk louder, Giselle, or closer?
Sure. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, go ahead.
But one of the things, I understood the concept of code switching, but what struck me today was the phrase to optimize the comfort.
I can't hear.
Loud. Oh, there's something wrong with the sound.
You're fading a little bit, yeah. Go ahead, Giselle. We can't hear you at all now, Giselle. I'm sorry.
Totally gone.
All right. Can you hear me?
A bit, yeah.
Okay. I was going to say, was the phrase to optimize the comfort of others. And so the person that just spoke, when she was talking about her accent, and the thing that always bothered me, still bothers me, is when someone would ask me, what are you? Not where are you from? Not where were you born? But what are you? And I realized that the response to that was, what do you want me to be? Because it's not about who I am. It's about what's going to make you comfortable. And I hadn't equated that with the whole concept of code switching. But I think part of the solution is when someone, maybe not in a public forum, but when someone does that, you have to hold them accountable. You have to check them. I had this one young guy who I worked with when I first graduated from college, and we were talking about what we were going to.
We lost you again, Giselle. Yeah, I can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Now we can now, yes.
Okay, I took the plugs out. I'm sorry.
All right.
And the young man asked me what was I doing for the weekend. I told him I was going to the beach. And he looked at me and he said, and he was white, and he looked at me and said, I didn't know that Black people went to the beach. To which my response wasn't very kind. It was more or less, where have you been living? Under a rock? And what I found out was that he was from Delaware. And the beaches in Delaware were segregated when he was growing up. So he had never seen a Black person at the beach. So I think having these conversations is part of the solution.
Ouch.
How to
Excellent.
bring it to
Excellent.
someone's attention when they do it, because sometimes they're just not aware that they're doing it, and you can't let it slide.
Yeah. Excellent.
Mm.
Mayra.
Sylvia and
Yeah.
Mayra.
Sylvia had her hand first.
Sylvia? Yeah.
I'm just sorry I couldn't hear Gazelle at all. I'm sure it was important. I'm very hard of hearing. I couldn't hear what she said. What I was thinking was how I can be insensitive when I meet someone who has an accent or looks different, and I want to say, where are you from? And then that person often feels insulted by that. And then I want to say, but I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't mean to be insensitive or racist. I don't understand that, why that's hurtful to you. And that's what starts to go through my mind. And what I need to do is like, know that if I say or do something that is hurtful to somebody, I need to accept that, even if I don't understand it, and then learn to understand it. And I know that a lot of other white people, this is something we really get hung up on, that, well, I didn't mean to be hurtful. I didn't mean to be racist. And it just seems a hard thing for us to get past, and I'm working on it.
I have
Sylvia,
to ask if
thank you.
Rochelle's comment is directly related to that. I thought maybe.
It is. Thank you. I think that how we engage people says so much about us. And one of the things is when we point out people's differences, we other them. We make it a point of saying to you, you are different than I am. And in doing that, it doesn't matter what the answer is, because what we've accomplished is that we've made a distinction between ourselves and the other. And what's I think is really important for us to begin to understand is that is one of the sustaining methods of racism, is to say that there's a standard and anybody who is different from that standard is less than. And I think it happens automatically. It happens generationally because we learn it from the people who model behavior for us. And so we have to be much more intentional about how we engage people. And sometimes starting with a question is not the best way.
All right, I have to follow up as a white girl though, because so many times when I'm meeting with people, we try to establish maybe a sense of background and common ground. So how do you reach out? I mean, are you from Northeast Philly? Where are you from? Massachusetts, Seattle? I mean, it's just a get to know you question. So how do we do that so that it's respectful and doesn't get a rise out of somebody that has had too many questions that just doesn't work right? Help me with that.
I think one of the ways that we do it is we talk about ourselves. Hi, I'm Rochelle, and I was born and raised in Philadelphia. Let's start there. Rather than, hi, who are you and where are you from? I start by talking about myself in the hopes that I'll say something that resonates with them and they'll go, oh, that's great. And they'll start to tell me about themselves without posing the questions, which people tend to, if you get the question, you've not gotten it once, you've gotten it a lot of times, and it can sound like an interrogation, you
Right.
know, that it's the 10th person who asked. I will say to you, there's something that's very profound. Mike Duncan starts his conversations with people that he doesn't know in the room by saying, "Hi, I'm Mike Duncan, and I'm the dumb white guy
From Texas, from Fort Worth.
from Fort Worth."
Yeah.
And so then people don't mind talking about themselves and engaging because he started there. And so people don't mind talking about who they are.
And his comment is 15 seconds long, not 15 minutes.
Right.
Okay. What else along these lines?
Good comments. I think Mayra had her hand up for a while. And then Deborah after that.
I'm gonna give you another idea, Karen, because I've done this before too, now that I'm more aware. And just like you would ask somebody that looks like you, I detect an accent. Where is that accent from? And so that again allows the person the opportunity to say, oh yeah, you do hear the accent. Thanks for noticing. Just like, you know, somebody from the South. Where from in the South? You know,
I hear your lovely accent, but I cannot place it.
I've done that. I did say to a young lady once, I said, you know, you have a really beautiful accent. Can you tell me where that may be from?
Yeah.
And then
or your name is just looks beautiful, but I couldn't figure out how to pronounce it. How do you say
right
it?
when you
go.
put it in that
From?
positive
Yes.
perspective, then it doesn't sound as sometimes again
Yeah.
insulting, been asked over and over again.
Thank you.
Yeah, but something that I wanted to add too, having worked in multiple places and having left those jobs, it was often because I felt like I no longer fit.
Where that white woman was coming
And that was after a short period of like 4 years.
from.
I
But
stayed at my last job longer, and that was because I switched to two
somebody presented
different careers, two different jobs. So it gave me the opportunity to be there longer. But getting to places and being there and always, not always, but it's, you know, after a certain point, I just felt like I didn't fit anymore for one reason or another. At my first job, it was because other people who had the same age and same education as me, we were in the middle of master's degrees, were promoted to directors and I wasn't.
Mhm.
And it didn't dawn on me until somebody else said it. And she happened to be African American. She said, you know, I really found it very interesting that there were 4 people that could have been director positions because you all came in around the same time. You all do the same jobs. And I was really working a lot of hours and really felt like I was outperforming, considering it was my very first job. I was doing some really creative things and bringing in students. And it just so happens that the ones that were promoted to directors were white, and then 2 of us that were Hispanics were not promoted. And it didn't dawn on me at all until later. And then at my second job, when I started to be questioned as to why was I helping Hispanic students more, I always felt like I had been hired for that position. And then I began to be questioned as to why was I helping those students more. And I always said at every single interview that I've gone in, I've said, my purpose in life is to help others just as I have been helped. And I have a particular, for, you know, whether that's my life goal or that's just what I want to do. If you take it, you take me as I am, and you take me for what I bring to the table. I'm bilingual, so I want to help Hispanic students. I'm a minority student, so I want to help other minority students. There were 5 other people who could help the white students. I was the only Hispanic that could help the other Hispanic students and other minority students. And I was questioned why I was doing that. And I said from the very beginning, when I interviewed for this job, this is what I said I was going to do. Why are you questioning me? Well, because you're here to help other students and you're here to help every student. I said, yes, I am helping every student, but why are you questioning why I'm helping the minority and the Hispanic students? That is my skill. That is my asset. That should not be questioned. And when that was questioned, I said, it's time for me to go because I don't need to be questioned why I'm here. And then at my third job, it was the same thing. I felt like I was underpaid for what I was doing. And I felt like I knew what my value was and nobody else could see it. Time for me to go. Same with the last job. When I was beginning to be questioned as to why I was doing things a certain way, when other directors were doing things a certain way and they were not being questioned and they also happened to be white, I said, it's time for me to go.
Mm.
Because I should not be questioned as to why I do the things I do when I am here to help, especially those that need to be helped, that need to understand the admissions process, that need to understand the financial aid process. And when you're questioning me as to why I do the things I do and you're not questioning anybody else, that to me is not only unfair, it's unethical. And if nobody else notices it, it's time for me to go. And then we talk about the place on the table. I had an opportunity to be in a leadership position. And when the president of the school again began to question me and making me feel like I didn't belong on that table, I said, then I must not belong on this table and it's time for me to go.
Mm. That's
Thanks so much, Mayra. Out of respect for your time, just to let everyone know, it is post 1 o'clock. However, if you can stay, we'll keep talking, okay? Deborah, you want to go ahead? Deborah Tanksy Brown?
Let me, am I on?
We can hear you.
Oh,
Yes,
you
we
can
can
hear
hear
me, good, thank you. Well, the one thing I just wanted to add is that oftentimes, well, I'll give you a particular situation. There was a new person that had come into our faith community that was Asian and still, and had an accent. And I observed that someone immediately asked her where she was from. And her response was, oh, well, why would you ask me where I'm from? And they responded, because of her accent. And her response was, I'm from the United States of America. Where are you from? And so when we call somebody out because of their accent, I think that we make an assumption that the person is from another place when they can be from right where around the corner from where you are. A case in point, I have lived in Chester County for over 40 years. But I still have people to say to me, you're not from around here, are you? And I said, well, where do you think, well, you've got this accent. And I was born and raised in Philadelphia. And so, but still, for as long as I have lived in Westchester, I've often felt that I'm still not considered a resident of Chester County. So I think that has caused me to be more mindful of how I engage people in terms of making assumptions about their place.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you. Brenda.
Oh, unmute yourself,
Brenda.
Brian. I can hear you. Thank you.
I always manage to do that. I just thought I'd relate a story that maybe is just a little bit different. Learning to code switch at 9. I grew up in a very segregated Kansas City, Kansas, and my family moved from one part of Kansas City to another part. And so 4th grade, all new kids, everything. And there were 4 of us who usually walked home together because we lived close to each other. And one girl said, no, 2 of them said, well, we don't want to be friends with you anymore. You know how grade school kids can be, because you talk like a white girl. And I said, no, I don't. I talk like me. And so they parted and they went the other way. But one girl said, you know what, if that's being proper, then I want to be proper too. And so I appreciated that. But then that was a lesson that I learned, that maybe at 9, that if I wanted to be accepted, not necessarily friends, but be accepted by those other 2 girls, then maybe I needed to figure out a way to kind of alter my speech. And that was, and I think that's important, because it wasn't a black-white situation. And I've been in many of those situations in my life and my career. But those were girls at 9 years old who wouldn't accept me because I didn't talk the way they talked. But, I still talk the way I talk. So, but I just thought those kind of different perspective. That's it.
Thank you, Brenda. One topic that, and clear my mind right now, at least, is that the accent, the language inflections, if you would. We've heard a couple comments on that. How do you address that natural curiosity to find out where someone's from without being insensitive? I don't have an answer. I'm speaking for me. I don't have an answer, but I'm working on. I'm trying to figure out how do I do that without insulting someone. Bob Bruckman, you got your hand up.
Reflecting a lot last, I guess, 5 weeks because of the Israeli-Palestinian situation, and I'm very grateful that I've been in many cultures. One of them being the Palestinian culture, the Israeli culture, and the American Jewish culture, and the American Black culture. And I've developed some understanding of what it means to live as being Black, and what a lot of the American Jewish people are experiencing now, unfortunately, is what it means to live in this country as Jewish. But they have absolutely no understanding whatsoever, no insight or empathy for the Black community or the Palestinian community. I shouldn't say that categorically. There is some instance of that, but there's almost a blindness, and which I find very disconcerting and unfortunate. But I've been grateful to have had the opportunity to experience these different cultures, and unfortunately, most of the people that I know, especially in the Jewish community, live in a bubble, and the only people they know are Jewish. And they're critical of the others, no matter what they are, even oftentimes if they're not their particular sect of Judaism. And so clearly we've got a lot of work to do.
Thank you, Bob. I'm going to bounce back to Melanie's TED Talk. And she said a couple of things that I'd like to leave you all with. And if there's more comments, please, we'll take those. But a couple of things I want to leave you with that she said. And one of her comments was, analyze your own capacity for growth and change.
Mm-hmm.
There's some strong messages there, And then she gave us, it takes extreme intentional self-awareness. And that's been demonstrated on this call. Some of the comments you all have made, your intentional extreme awareness. And then the 4 actionable items that she talked about. Do your own personal work. As I've shared with you all, I have judged people in the past just by no foundation whatsoever. And that's my human error in doing that, okay? But then also make some connections with people that don't look like you. So when you're out and about, when you're networking, when you're meeting new people, approach someone that you don't know, someone that doesn't look like you, and try to engage with that person. It's amazing what you learn sometimes. I've learned a lot by doing that personally. I can share that with you. When you have privilege, use your privilege to create equity.
Yeah.
And then someone would say, I don't have any privilege. Trust me, every one of us has privilege. It depends on the circumstance, it depends on the group you're with, but every one of us has privilege. Use your privilege to benefit someone else. And then intentionally and deliberately engage in non-biasing interactions. Something we can all do. And the comments that I hear today, we didn't solve this problem. It may never get solved, but we made some steps in the right direction. And for my heart, that works for me. And I hope it works for you. Thank you all for joining us today. And I look forward to you joining us the next time around. Beth, have you got the last page? Have you got the last page for the next community conversations? Just want to remind you all some things that are coming up.
One moment.
I tell you what, this is where it really makes a difference when you all sign in, when you all comment and share with us your thoughts, your comments, and some of the conversations that are coming up. We're all for December, but then back on January 9th, we're going to be back to equity and education. In February, Black History Month. March, Nutrition, Health, and Wellness. April, Latinos and Race. May, Get Out the Vote, Chester County. And then in June, we're going to have a discussion about Juneteenth again. Again, thank you so much. Please sign up for future community conversations. This is where we can begin to make a difference. Thank you for your time, your attention, and your comments. Have a great day.
Nice job. Thank you to
Thank
everybody.
you, guys.
Sign up and bring friends or people who need to learn more.